So next question, Paula says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the relationship between Pluto and Ceres. So Pluto and Ceres are linked in mythology. Ceres had a daughter, Proserpina, and Proserpina was abducted by Pluto. And Pluto took her to the underworld and made her his queen. And Ceres obviously wasn't very happy about this. She missed her daughter and grieved for her. Eventually, a negotiation took place, and it was agreed that Proserpina could come back to the earth for 6 months of the year to be with her mother, and then for the rest of the year she would go back down into the underworld with Pluto. And so consequently, during the spring and the summer, life flourishes on the earth because Ceres is happy that her daughter is back with her. And then when Proserpina returns back to Pluto, back down to the underworld, Ceres kind of goes into her grieving again, and we we experience autumn and winter as the leaves fall and everything dies. So we've got this mythology that describes the sort of passage of the seasons, but we also have this story about loss. And I think Ceres and Pluto, any sort of connections between them, sort of maybe show that in this lifetime we're learning something about the fact that we have to go through loss in order for life to thrive. There has to be loss, there has to be death, there has to be endings of some kind, Pluto, in order for life to blossom and flourish, Ceres. So that would be one way I would see the connection between those two and the relationship between those two. And of course, if we have a harsh aspect between Pluto and Ceres in the natal chart, it can be quite difficult because we're always struggling with that. We don't want to let go. Ceres doesn't want to let go of her daughter. She doesn't want Pluto to have her. She doesn't want her daughter to grow up. Sometimes Ceres-Pluto aspects in the natal chart can actually signify difficulty with the mother. A mother that doesn't want us to grow up and to sort of cut the apron strings, or maybe we struggle with being a mother ourselves because we have a similar kind of feeling or scared that we're going to lose what we love. That's another way of looking at it, scared that we're going to, if we create something in our lives, somehow it's going to be taken from us. So there can be lots of these myths kind of coming through into our unconscious and then sort of bubbling up to the conscious mind, where we have great fear of losing control and not being in control and having the power, losing our power in some way. So Pluto Ceres, I mean, there's so much more. I feel like there's a whole video there of stuff that I could talk about with Pluto and Ceres, especially as I've been studying Ceres a lot recently as well. Okay, so for now, anyway, that's just some of my thoughts. Really good question. Thank you for that. So Pamela says, I'm interested in the role of Sabian symbols in your astrology. What are the most important to analyse in the natal chart? Okay, so if you're just doing a quick look at a natal chart, then the most important would be the sun and the moon and the angles, particularly the ascendant and the midheaven. So as a bare minimum, those would be the ones that I would look at. As far as the role that they play in my astrology, they now play a very important role. When I first came across Sabian symbols, I really wasn't sure. I didn't gel. I didn't get it. I understood the concept, but I just didn't feel it working for me. So I left it for quite a long time. And then I really can't remember what it was that switched me back onto them, but something did, something I read did. And I started to really see that there is some significance to these symbols. And I tend to use them a lot now. So they do play a big role in how I work with, not just with the natal chart, but also with transits. One thing that I do, and it can be really, really interesting, is that if you're having a particularly hard transit, so I don't know, say Saturn square Mercury, for example, and that's been challenging, then have a look at what are the Sabian symbols involved. What is the Sabian symbol that Saturn keeps sitting on, and what is the Sabian symbol of your natal Mercury? And sometimes you can find that the symbols can be incredibly descriptive of the situation that you find yourself in. So I do think the Sabian symbols can be just absolutely fascinating, and can really give us a very visual image to work with, as far as delineating the natal chart, and also as well with transits and so on as well. And I just feel like I'm only scratching the surface sometimes. I feel like there's so much more work I could be doing with them. And I always feel like I'm learning more. So I keep coming back to, like in my own natal chart, I'll come back to the symbol for my sun or the symbol for my ascendant and so on. Constellations of the stars shining brightly in the sky, which is kind of perfect for an astrologer. You know, but I will come back to those symbols, and I'll always see something more in them, some other story in that single image. So they do play a really, really important part. So the next question, Lynn says, what is the significance of the sun and the moon? So, I mean, each of these could deserve a video of their own, but just as a quick answer, the sun and the moon are the lights in the sky, so they are the things that are most prominent about us, and they together make up our basic personality, our basic character. The sun is where we shine, and so therefore it is connected with our identity, who we see ourselves as, who we want to be, the mission we've got here, our life's purpose. It's our consciousness, it's our will, our creativity. Whereas the moon is what is underneath everything. It's the unconscious. It is the soul. It is what we feel. It's our emotions, our reactions, instincts. It's our family connections. Also, the sun is the masculine principle, which I sort of mentioned earlier on. The moon is the feminine principle. So the two together give us this very rounded idea of who this person is before we even start to look at other aspects of the chart. The sun and the moon is kind of where you go first, along with then the ascendant and the midheaven. So Barbra says, what is your take on 5D planets? And I admit I didn't know what this is. I had to message her and ask her what she meant by that. Apparently there are some astrologers who refer to the asteroids as 5D planets. So I'm not really sure what that is all about because I haven't read anything on there. But when it comes to the asteroids, many of you know who follow my Lure Astrology page that I use the asteroids a lot. I'm really fascinated with them. And I think they can give us some very specific information sometimes, and some very relevant stories that are part of our personality, are part of our story, part of our journey in this lifetime. However, I do think it's very important not to dilute the chart by trying to use absolutely every single asteroid that there is, and putting all the asteroids on the chart, because there's thousands and thousands of them, and you're going to end up with this kind of woolly chart that there just seems to be just everything on there, and you can't make sense of it. So I think it's very important to find ways to sort of hone that down, and the way I do that is that I look specifically at, in the natal chart, at conjunctions, and this is within 1 degree with major planets and asteroids. So I look at the conjunctions. Sometimes I will look at other aspects, but only if they are pretty much almost exact and involved in some kind of other aspect pattern between the major planets. So sometimes I will look at a square, and sometimes I will look at a conjunction, a square, or an opposition with asteroids. But for the most part, I think the most helpful way you can access asteroid information is by looking at the conjunctions first in your natal chart to the planets and to the angles. Start there before you start kind of looking at every other aspect that's going on, because you'll very quickly lose the thread and lose the most important stories that are contained in your birth chart. That said, there's always a kind of but. That said, if you have if you're, for example, if you're practicing witch and you have a particular god or goddess deity that you use and that you honor, maybe you do want to know where that particular asteroid, that named asteroid, is in your chart, and that might be helpful as well. I have done readings for people in the past who are sort of following a very spiritual path and following a very magical path, and they wanted to know how to connect with deity, and so we did a reading on looking at which particular deities were shown through the asteroids in the chart, and that proved to be really, really interesting. So you can do that as well, but first and foremost, I think it is most important to focus on those asteroid connections that are conjunct your natal planets and angles, so that you don't get lost, because there's thousands and thousands of asteroids. But I do think the sort of mini stories of the asteroids can just be incredibly enlightening, and really, really powerful in their own right. So use them, but to keep some kind of limits, keep some limits in place, so that you don't get lost with how exciting all the asteroids can be. Okay, so next question. Mia says, can I consider the north node more of dharma and the south node karma in the natal chart? I admit I don't really understand dharma. I went to have a look at the meaning of dharma to see if it was what I was thinking it was. And basically, from what I understand, it's connected with the idea of right action, and that we have an innate understanding of what right action is. Like, we have an innate moral understanding of between good and bad, and so on. To be honest, I think of the nodes being connected with karma, and the way I see karma, and it's perhaps a more westernized view of karma. So it's not so much that in a past life you've done something bad, south node, and therefore you're going to get something negative in this lifetime. You know, I don't think it's as simplistic as that. And also, I think if you sort of start to think in those terms of, well, you know, this has gone wrong for me in this lifetime, so I must have done something bad in a previous life, that can take us to some very unethical places. For example, if someone is born with some kind of disability, for example, and we turn around and say, well, it's because you did something bad in a past life, unhelpful. That's not helpful, that particular view. I see it more as, in each lifetime we have a set of things that we want to learn, and we use obviously our previous experience as a soul, to sort of use it as a guide of what we want to achieve in the next life. And so sometimes we have done things in previous lives that we wish we hadn't, or that we wish that we'd done differently, or we didn't do in the way that we wanted to, or they were just difficult experiences that we didn't fully incorporate into ourselves or didn't fully understand. And so the karma in this life is maybe to work with that material that wasn't fully understood in a previous lifetime. So I'm not seeing it as crime and punishment, because, like I say, I think that can end up just being a really unhelpful way of looking at the idea of karma. So to me, both the North Node and the South Node are connected with karma, because the South Node is the karma of the past. And the North Node is also connected with the karma that we're actually creating in this lifetime as well. So we could also say the North Node is sort of connected with the idea of what we do now is going to have consequences in a future life. So that also is something to bear in mind as well. But maybe you have a different understanding of dharma, or you know, maybe someone who has read a lot of Hindu philosophy and Hindu religion might have a better explanation or a better understanding than I have to really differentiate between the two. Luz, olá Luz. Luz from Portugal. Luz says, what are the main differences in the North Node, South Node being retrograde or direct? So this is a really interesting question. Basically speaking, the nodes are, if you use the mean node, they are always in retrograde motion. Always, always. There's never any direct. But I use the true node, and very occasionally, for a very short period of time, the nodes will start moving direct. Now in a natal chart, I honestly don't really take much notice of it. There's not really a great deal written about it as well. And I tend not to think too much about it. But the weird thing is that recently I've had a spate of readings come in where in the progressed chart, the node has been stationing either retrograde or direct. And this has caught my eye. And this is what happens sometimes. It's like something in astrology or a planet or a point kind of calls you and says, look at me, there's something that you need to know here. So I started thinking about the direct motion of the nodes and wondering whether it indicates a lifetime where there is less emphasis on what went before, because as I was just saying, the nodes talk a lot about what occurred in a past life and what we're dealing with consequences wise from a past life. Maybe a direct node in the natal chart means that you're having a lifetime where there is less focus on what was and more focus on this particular present lifetime and what you're creating in this lifetime as far as future lifetimes are concerned. Maybe as well, when the progressed node stations direct, we're also going through a phase where we're dealing with less of consequences from the past and more with what is going on sort of right in front of us in the present. I have only just really been thinking about this for the last couple of months or so, so it's a very fresh interpretation, and I'm definitely open to other people's ideas of what this might mean, because it's something that it's really only just caught my eye. But that's what I've come up with so far. So it'd be interesting to see perhaps what anybody else feels from this idea of the nodes stationing direct or being stationary direct in a natal chart. Okay, so Cathy says, can you give some insight for a Libra ascendant and the mirror opposite of the chart, i.e. Leo in the 11th house, Aquarius, and Aquarius in the 5th house with respect to past lives? Okay, I think the first thing I should say here is that the houses and signs are two different things. I know we do link them together a lot, and sometimes you'll even see it in a book, like it will say Saturn transiting through the 4th house or the sign Cancer, but they are two different things. The house shows you where in your life something is occurring, and the sign shows you how it's the way it's being expressed. So for example, if you have the North Node in your 11th house in the sign of Leo, then we can see that it's important for you to be connecting up with other people. It's very important for you to be connecting with other people, finding your tribe, but also to allow yourself to shine. The way that you do that, the way that you connect with other people, 11th house, is by working from your heart, Leo. It's by being confident, Leo. It's by being creative, Leo. And that is the way you find your tribe. That is where you find your sense of belonging, your groups, your friendship circle, your network. That is where you feel as though you have a place in society. So if you can separate the idea of houses and signs, then you'll get a better understanding of what it means that for them to kind of be switched over. I understand what you mean, because usually in a traditional chart, in a flat chart, you'd have Aries on the ascendant and Libra on the descendant. So the first house would be Aries and the 7th house would be Libra. I nearly forgot the sign then. But if it's the other way around, it just means that as a Libra rising, you're someone who is here to relate, you're someone who is here to connect. And in relationships, 7th house, you need to have some kind of independence, Aries, or you need to take the initiative more, or you're learning to be strong, because Libra rising likes to compromise a lot, and it's always like, well, what do you want to do and what do you like? And I'll do whatever you want. That's Libra to an extreme. Whereas Aries is, to hell with that, I'm going to do what I want to do. So through relationships, you're learning something about being more independent and being a bit more decisive as well. So like I say, it's separating the idea of the sign and the house, and then you'll find it easier to come to some kind of interpretation. The next question is, Trine says, Margaret Gray and Armand Diaz and their site Relationship in Astrology mentioned today the consequence of having Mercury retrograde in one's natal chart. I wonder what other planets retrograde would mean, myself having 3 planets retrograde in my chart but not Mercury. And she also says, congratulations on your jubilee. Thank you very much. Okay, so retrogrades in the natal chart. Invariably, many of us will have at least one retrograde in our natal chart, because the planets Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, they all have a retrograde period which is quite long during the year. What's more noticeable is if you have Mercury, Venus or Mars retrograde in the natal chart. That's going to be one that is going to catch the astrologer's eye. Generally speaking, a retrograde planet just means that that energy is a little bit more internalized, more focused inwards than this outward expression that a direct motion planet would have. What's particularly important to note is the times when by progression those natal retrograde planets station direct, because that can represent a turning point in your life. And it can, say for example, if Mercury is retrograde in your natal chart and then turns direct when you're 15, 16 years old, for example, it might be when you sort of suddenly find your voice and you become a bit more vocal about what you want and so on. If Venus is the one that is retrograde in your natal chart, perhaps you're somewhat reticent, or you're somewhat shy, or you find it difficult to relate when it comes to relationships and love and so on. Maybe you don't want to put yourself too forwards. but you're still someone who is loving. It's just that energy is kind of internalized. Perhaps you're very, very creative, and then when Venus stations direct by progression, you sort of come out of your shell a little bit more, but you still have that initial blueprint of those retrograde planets in your natal chart. And it just means, it doesn't mean that they can't function, it just means that they are more of an internalization of those particular energies.